Hello everybody. Today we'll talk about the digestive system. Uh, Digestive system is mainly responsible for the digestion of food. That's why it is called the digestive system. But it has a number of other important functions. First, we'll see the parts or organs of the digestive system. Then we'll talk about the processes uh, that take place in the digestive system. Then we'll talk about the peritoneum, which covers the abdominal cavity, and by covering the abdominal cavity, it protects the uh, digestive organs inside the abdominal cavity. And peritoneum has a cavity, and that is called the peritoneal cavity. We'll talk about those. We'll talk about the peritoneum, which is the connective tissue, double layered connective tissue covering of the abdomen, and inside that you have a cavity called the peritoneal cavity. We'll talk about the first organ, uppermost structure of the digestive system, which is the mouth. We'll see the structures inside the mouth. Then we'll talk about the layers in the wall of the GI tract. Then we'll talk about the secretion, regulation of secretion in the digestive system. There are two types of regulation, short and long reflexes. So we'll talk about those reflexes that control the secretion. Then we'll talk about the nerve plexuses in the wall of the GI tract, different types of movements. Then we'll talk about other digestive organs. So first, we divide the digestive system organs into two groups. One is called GI tract or gastrointestinal tract, which is a long tube from the mouth to all the way the anus. So it is a long continuous tube, and at different locations this tube gets narrow or wider, and food stuff passes through this tube. Okay. The parts of GI tract includes mouth or oral cavity. Then next to the mouth is the pharynx, which is a muscular tube. Then esophagus, a narrow long tube that takes the food bolus from the pharynx to the stomach. So that is the esophagus. And then that narrow tube gets very wide, expands a lot to form the stomach. So stomach is a hollow organ. Inside the stomach, the food stuff is stored and digested for hours. Then it becomes narrow again and very long. That is the small intestine, the longest part of the GI tract. And after the small intestine, you have the large intestine. In large intestine, you have colon. Then you have rectum. You have anal canal and the anus. And colon has different parts: ascending, colon, transverse, colon, descending colon, and the last is the sigmoid. Sigmoid colon. So ascending colon, transverse colon, descending colon, sigmoid colon, and then you have the rectum, anal canal, and anus. Okay, so these are the parts of that long tube from the mouth to the anus, and that is called the GI tract or gastrointestinal tract or alimentary canal. Then outside of the GI tract you have other organs. Those are called the accessory digestive organs. Inside the mouth you have teeth, tongue. Under the liver you have the gallbladder. You have salivary glands around the mouth. You have liver and pancreas. All these organs belong to the accessory digestive organs located outside of that tube. Here in this picture you see the oral cavity or mouth, and around the mouth you have three sets of salivary glands. The largest ones are parotid glands, just in front and below the ear. And under the tongue you have the sublingual. Sub means under, lingual means tongue, and under the mandible, this bone, you have the submandibular salivary gland. So these are salivary glands, and salivary glands secrete saliva into the oral cavity or mouth, and that saliva helps to mix the food and uh, uh, make the food uh, moist and help to form a bolus of food. Saliva is a very watery secretion, and by the movement of the tongue you mix the food with saliva and form the bolus of food. And saliva also has a secretion called the mucus, and that is slippery, and that slippery mucus uh, helps to form the bolus and swallow the food bolus. Okay, move towards the pharynx. Uh, Saliva also has uh, the enzyme that can destroy the bacteria and keeps the mouth clean. So cleansing of the mouth, another function of saliva. Then you see pharynx is here, and then after the pharynx you have a long narrow tube, and this long narrow tube is called the esophagus. It is a muscular tube, and it very quickly moves the food bolus from the pharynx to the stomach. So food bolus arrives into the stomach very quickly. How the esophagus moves the food bolus very fast. Esophagus has a movement, contraction, that is called peristalsis. Wave-like movement, waves. Okay, so waves go one after another to move the food bolus down. Also, inner surface of the esophagus is slippery because of mucus secretion. Okay, so mucus makes the inner surface of the esophagus slippery. So because of those two things, the food bolus very quickly moves from the pharynx to the stomach. Okay, then you see next organ is the stomach, and the stomach is very dilated, wide, hollow organ, and food stuff stays there for hours. And from the gastric gland of the stomach, hydrochloric acid and other secretions occur, mainly hydrochloric acid, HCl. And that acid helps to digest the food, breakdown of the food. So inside the stomach, a lot of secretion occurs. So the food bolus, semi-solid food bolus, becomes liquid. And so the main function of the stomach is storage for few hours and digestion by secretion of hydrochloric acid. Then next organ is the small intestine. It starts here and ends here. So this whole long tube is the small intestine. Okay, small intestine has three parts. First short part next to the stomach is the duodenum, this part, and then you have jejunum here, and ileum is the last part, and the ileum enters into the large intestine here. So duodenum, jejunum, and ileum, those are the parts of the small intestine. Okay, then from here the large intestine starts. The first part of the large intestine is called the cecum. Okay, cecum. And you see a tiny finger-like or worm-like structure is attached to the cecum, that is called the appendix, also called vermiform appendix. Vermiform means worm-like. So vermiform appendix. You know that inflammation of the appendix is called appendicitis. Probably all of you have heard about it. Appendicitis is the inflammation of the tiny appendix. When inflammation occurs, swelling of the appendix occurs. It gets bigger and infected, and you know the fecal stuff, food stuff is inside it, and if you don't surgically remove the appendix, then what can happen? It gets bigger and eventually rupture and release the toxic materials from inside to the peritoneal cavity, and inside the peritoneal cavity it will spread all over the peritoneal cavity and will infect other organs, and that can cause uh, shock, and even uh, death can also occur. Okay, once it ruptures, then it becomes very serious. Anyway, so that is the first part of the large intestine. Then next part is the ascending colon, going up, then transverse colon, this part, descending colon, I already mentioned this, and this part is called the sigmoid colon. Okay, here, and then rectum, anal canal, and anus. Now let's see the accessory digestive organs. I mentioned salivary glands, tongue, you have teeth, and then liver. Liver is the largest gland of the body. It is considered as a gland. It has other functions. Then you have the gallbladder, right? Pancreas here. So those are accessory digestive organs. Processes take place in the digestive system. Ingestion, putting the food in the mouth. Food into the mouth. Very simple. You put the food, first thing what you do, you put the food into the mouth, and that is ingestion. Then propulsion. Propulsion is the movement of food through the GI tract. You know that food starts to move downwards. That is the propulsion. Then digestion. Digestion, it is very simple. Breakdown of food. Breakdown of large food pieces into small molecules. If the food is not converted to small molecules, blood will not be able to take it from the intestine. That's why you need digestion. Very important, right? Breakdown. Now, digestion could be mechanical and chemical. Two types. Mechanical is by pressure, right? So, you know, when you put the food, large food into the mouth, mechanical digestion starts because you cut the food, chop the food, grind the food, right? Chew the food with teeth and tongue, and by pressure the food breaks into small pieces. So that is one, that is called the mechanical digestion. Chemical digestion also starts in the mouth. You know that secretion of saliva that I already explained occurs in the mouth from the salivary glands. And salivary saliva, that secretion has digestive enzymes, right? So that is chemical digestion. Absorption. Absorption is the fine molecules, food molecules. After digestion, the fine food molecules, those are also can be termed as nutrients, are taken into the blood. Mainly occurs in the small intestine. In the intestine, the food molecules or nutrients are taken into the blood, and that process is called absorption. And blood takes the food, nutrients or food molecules to the liver first. So first processing of nutrients take place inside the liver. And those foodstuffs are not absorbed. They will get out as feces, and that is called defecation, excretion of unnecessary foodstuffs as feces. So those are the processes take place in the digestive system: ingestion, digestion, mechanical and chemical, mechanical by pressure, chemical by secretion, and then absorption. Nutrients are taken into the blood, right? Fats are usually taken into the lymphatic vessels called the lacteals. You have learned that. And propulsion is the movement that helps propulsion is the movement of the food bolus or food stuff downwards by the contraction of the GI tract, and excretion or defecation. Peritoneum and peritoneal cavity. This is the diaphragm, and this is thoracic cavity, and this is abdominal cavity. You know, diaphragm separates those two, and a double layered membrane. This is the anterior wall of the abdomen, and this is the back posterior wall. So this is the abdominal cavity, okay, and a double layered connective tissue serous membrane that covers the abdominal cavity, and this double layered serous membrane is called peritoneum. Peritoneum, okay. So the peritoneum actually protects the abdominal organs. So most of the digestive organs are here. You know that you have the esophagus comes down through the thoracic cavity and enters into the stomach here. So your stomach is in the abdominal cavity, your small intestine, your most part of your large intestine, all those organs, your liver, pancreas, right? Those gallbladder, those most of those, most of the digestive organs are located in the abdominal cavity. And peritoneum, this double layered serous membrane, protects the organs inside the cavity. The outer layer of the peritoneum is called the parietal peritoneum. It is like, pleura or pericardium, same way, parietal layer. And inner layer is called the visceral layer, okay, and the cavity is called the peritoneal cavity. Contains a lot of fluid, and that fluid is very helpful to reduce the friction. You know, so many organs are inside the abdominal cavity, so that fluid inside the peritoneal cavity helps to reduce the friction between those. Now you see, this is the abdominal cavity, and this is a section at the upper part of the abdomen. So you see here, this is the parietal peritoneum, this one attached to the wall, right? This is the outer one. Then you see the parietal peritoneum moves inwards like this, and they cover the digestive organs like this. So this is your alimentary canal. For example, this is your stomach or intestine, and parietal peritoneum is attached to the wall. This is the wall, and then from the wall it goes inwards like this and covers the abdominal organs, digestive organs. At different location of the abdominal cavity, you see this is the parietal peritoneum, outer one, and then goes inwards and then covers, for example, your stomach. This is the stomach, and then they again move like this and cover another organ. For example, this is your liver. Okay, so you see, covering the stomach, then covering the liver, and then getting out to join or get attached to the wall of the body. So this is the visceral peritoneum and this is the parietal peritoneum. So visceral peritoneum covers the directly attached to the organs, and parietal is attached to the wall, body wall. Now these folds are called mesentery. Okay, so this is the back. You see the vertebrae, back of the body. So this is called the dorsal mesentery, comes from the back, and these are ventral mesentery, front. Now mesentery has a couple of important functions. You can easily realize or understand that because of the mesentery that is coming from the wall, body wall, the organs are tied to the wall, body wall, and the mesentery, by tying the organs to the body wall, uh, helps to keep the organs in right locations in the abdominal cavity, because abdominal cavity is very big and you have so many organs, so those organs must stay or tied to the body wall to stay in the right location. So they will stay there. That is one important function, keeping the organs in right location in the abdominal cavity. Number two, from the body wall, blood vessels and nerves enter into the organs. So passes for the blood vessels and nerves, you see here like this. So blood vessels and nerves pass through the mesentery. So those are two important functions. Another important function is a lot of fat accumulates in it. So storage of fat. So those are three functions: keeping the organs in right locations, number two, passes of blood vessels and nerves, right? And number three, I said storage of fat, energy. So these are important functions of the mesentery. Now we'll see the first organ of the GI tract, which is the oral cavity or mouth, also called buccal cavity. The boundary of your mouth or oral cavity, anteriorly you have the lips, laterally you have the cheeks. The roof of the mouth or oral cavity is the palate. If you put your finger inside your mouth and move up, you will touch the palate. You can also touch the palate by your tongue. The roof of the oral cavity, and tongue is the floor, forms the floor of the oral cavity or mouth. Roof, lateral walls, two lateral walls formed by the cheeks, lips, anterior. So that is the boundary of the oral cavity or mouth. And oral orifice is the opening of the mouth through which you put the food inside the mouth. And inner lining is stratified squamous epithelium. Why stratified squamous? Because the chance of friction is very high. A lot of friction occurs inside the mouth, because when you chew the food, foodstuffs, there is a good chance that that can injure the uh, oral cavity. So that's why you have a stratified squamous to protect the mouth from friction. So this is the oral cavity or mouth, lips, anterior boundary. This is the palate, roof of the mouth, tongue is the floor. And now if you see the palate has two parts. You see here, this part is bony part, which is called the hard palate. Hard palate is the bony part, and soft palate is muscular part. So palate has two parts, hard palate and soft palate. Hard palate is formed by two bones, maxilla and palatine bone. Its name is palatine because it forms the palate. Maxilla forms anterior 2/3 part. If I divide this bony part into 2/3, anterior 2/3 is maxilla here, and posterior 1/3 is by palatine bone. Okay, so 2/3 anterior and 1/3 posterior. Soft palate is this part. This is the soft palate, and if you see the soft palate, this is a skeletal muscle, and that muscle is covered by a thick mucosal layer. So skeletal muscle covered by thick mucosa. Uh, now that is the palate. Then next organ is the pharynx. Okay, and then esophagus. So this is esophagus. Right, now pharynx has three parts. Behind the nasal cavity, somewhere here, that is the nasopharynx. Then behind the oral cavity, oropharynx, and then last part is the laryngopharynx. So food bolus, after the bolus is formed, you swallow the food, right? So push the food into the pharynx. Now when you move the food bolus into the pharynx, what happens, you see the soft palate, and the end of the soft palate, this is called uvula. So soft palate and uvula moves up to block this passage. So this part will move up to block here. So the food stuff will not go into the nasal cavity, will not move upwards, will only go downwards. Okay, so this is a protection, uvula and soft palate. So the food will only move downwards, will enter into the esophagus. Okay. Now another important thing, what happens here, when you swallow the food moves downwards towards the esophagus. This structure is called the epiglottis, that covers the inlet of larynx like this. This one will move down to cover the inlet of larynx, opening of the larynx, because this is only for air. So food should not enter into the larynx. Food should only go this way, right? When you breathe, this will stay open. When you swallow the food, it will get closed like this. Okay. So the function of epiglottis is covering the laryngeal inlet or opening during the swallowing of the food. Other time it will stay open to let the air get in. Inside the mouth, you can see a number of structures. So let's see quickly. This is your lip, and this is the gingiva or gum, and a tiny tissue structure connects the lip to the gingiva or gum, that is called frenulum. So this is superior labial. Labial means lip. Frenulum because it is attached to the lip. And this is the lower lip. So here, so this is the inferior labial frenulum. This one. Okay. Then you have teeth, upper arch and the lower arch. So two arches. Then you have, you see, this is the uvula. This is the palate. Hard part of palate is here. Hard palate, bony part. And here is the soft palate, skeletal muscle covered by thick mucosa, and this is the end of the soft palate, that is called the uvula. In both sides of the palate, you have in the back of the palate, you have the palatine tonsils that you can see here, palatine tonsils. Okay, and this is the tongue, and under the tongue you have another frenulum tissue that connects the tongue to the tissue underneath. So this is also a frenulum, but this is not labial because it's not attached to the lip, it is attached to the tongue. That's why it is called lingual. Lingual means tongue. Okay, so lingual frenulum. Now you see under the tongue you will see a number of tiny openings. So these two are the openings for submandibular glands. From the submandibular glands, ducts, the tube-like structures, bring the saliva here. So that's why you have the openings for submandibular ducts. And these are the openings for sublingual ducts, come from the sublingual salivary gland. So those are the structures you can see in open mouth, inside the mouth. Tongue is an important organ that forms the floor of the oral cavity. I already mentioned mixing the food and chewing the food, initiating swallowing. After the food bolus is formed in the mouth, you push the tongue against the palate to move the food backwards towards the pharynx. So from the mouth, the food bolus enters into the pharynx, and that is called the initiation of swallowing, starting of swallowing towards the pharynx from the mouth. Okay, so you use the tongue to push it into the pharynx. Speech, we all know that tongue helps in its speech production, and taste. In the tongue, you have taste receptors, taste buds, and the taste buds have the receptors, taste receptors. Taste receptors help you to taste the food. Okay. The movement of the tongue is controlled by the muscles. Those muscles help to move the tongue. They come from the bones around the tongue, facial bones, and those are called the extrinsic tongue muscles. Like this is your tongue, Okay, and these are the muscles coming from different directions from the bones, and they help to move the tongue uh, in different directions. Tongue moves in so many different directions, you know that, uh, and that movement is helped by the extrinsic muscles. So these are extrinsic muscles. Okay, and now tongue is a muscular organ. So inside the tongue you have the muscle, and these muscles are called intrinsic tongue muscles. Makes sense? Intrinsic muscles are inside the tongue. So extrinsic muscles come from different directions and help to move the tongue to different directions, and intrinsic muscles can make the tongue shorter by contraction. So if these muscles contract, you know, the tongue, the shape of the tongue will change. It will get shorter. So changing the shape is the function of the intrinsic muscles. Makes sense, right? And extrinsic muscles movement. Okay. Now, taste buds are present, as I mentioned, in the tongue. And if you see the surface of the tongue, you see the tiny dot-like structures, right, all over the tongue. These are called papilla. You can see without microscope. And there are 4 different types of papilla. So 2 types of papilla are present in the front part of the tongue everywhere. One is filiform, another type fungiform. So both filiform and fungiform are here. Then in the dorsal or back part of the tongue, you have larger papilla, and they form V-shaped structure or uh, V-shaped uh, lining here, so that these taste papillas are called circumvallate. Circumvallate papilla. So filiform and fungiform are here, and in the back part you have larger papilla. They form inverted V, and those papilla are called circumvallate papilla. And in the back part, both sides of the tongue, only in the back part, both sides have another type of papilla. These are called foliate. Foliate papilla. Okay, so circumvallate and foliate. All these papilla, inside the papilla, you have taste buds. And I mentioned inside the taste buds you have the taste receptors, right? Okay, and the receptors could be sweet, sour, bitter, or other tastes. So you have the receptors to taste different types of tastes. Now just know one more thing, that all papilla have taste buds inside except the filiform. Filiform are empty, so no taste buds are present, or no taste buds or taste receptors are present inside the filiform. So they are not useful to taste the food, but other papilla are filled with taste buds and receptors. Here again you see in the front part of the tongue you have the foliate and fungiform. These are circumvallate and these are foliate. Salivary glands I have already mentioned. The largest is the parotids. There are two parotids in front of the ear, just a little bit below in front, and under the mandible, under the tongue. I already mentioned the functions of the saliva at the very beginning. Three types of salivary glands. Location. This is the parotid, the largest one in front of the ear, and you see from the gland a tube that goes to the oral cavity or mouth to take the saliva from here, from the gland to the oral cavity, and these are called ducts. So this is a duct, salivary duct, and from sublingual you see the ducts. I showed you the opening for these ducts before, and this is submandibular. This is the duct for submandibular. Composition of saliva. If you see the components or composition of saliva, it secretes by two types of cells inside the gland, serous and mucous cells. Serous cells secrete highly watery secretion, and mucus is thick slippery secretion, okay, that contains mucin, the slippery chemical. Saliva is highly watery, and 97 to 99.5% of it is water. Slightly acidic, which is good, not strong. If it is strong, it will burn your mouth, right? So, but weakly acidic, and that is helpful to keep the mouth clean and also kill the microorganisms. Saliva has electrolytes, sodium, potassium, chloride, phosphate, bicarbonate. Saliva causes chemical digestion. You remember I mentioned because it has enzymes, amylase for carbohydrate and lipase for lipid. Okay, so digestion or breakdown of carbohydrates and lipids also occur in the mouth, but no protein. No chemical digestion of protein occurs in the mouth, but mechanical digestion of everything occurs in the mouth because you crush the food. Mucin is, I mentioned, the slippery secretion component in the saliva, help to form the food bolus and move the food towards the pharynx. Saliva has small amount of metabolic wastes, urea, uric acid, and these chemicals, lysozyme, immunoglobulin A, defensin, and cyanide compound, they are also present in the saliva and can kill the microorganisms. Teeth. In early part of your life, very early part, 6 months to 24 months, during that time, you get only 20 deciduous teeth, and then deciduous teeth are replaced by 32 permanent teeth, and 32 permanent teeth are present in two arches, right? Upper dental arch and lower dental arch. Upper dental arch in the maxilla, lower dental arch attached to the mandible. Okay, so 16 in each arch. Okay, now incisor teeth are total 8. That means if I divide these arches into two halves, there are 8 incisor teeth. So now you can think that how many should be in each half of each arch. 2 to 4, 6, 8. So 2 in each, right? So 1, 2, 1, 2. So 2 in each half of each arch. So total 4 here and 4 here, 8. Then you have total 4 canine. Those are pointed, sharp pointed uh, teeth, mainly to tear. So incisors are mainly to chop or cut. Canines are to tear the flesh-like food. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So you have total 4 canines. Okay. Then you have next you have 8 premolars and then 12 molars. Premolars and molars mainly help you to uh, crush the food, break the food. So incisors cut or chop, cutting or chopping, canines tearing, and premolars and molars mainly crushing, grinding. Okay. So here these are permanent teeth. So each row, each arch has 16, right? So in each half of the arch you have 2 incisor, 1 canine, then 2 premolars and 3 molars. Okay, 2, 1, 2, 3. So total 8, and this side 8, 16 in each arch. Parts of a tooth, if you see, the tooth has 3 parts. This part is called the crown, and the part inside the gum, this part is called the neck, and the the bottom part inside the bone, maxilla or mandible, this part is called the root. So 3 parts of the tooth. Only we see the crown from outside. We don't see the neck or the root. Now the structure. The tooth is attached to the bony socket by the ligaments. These are called the periodontal ligaments. And if you see the crown part has a outer structure that is called the enamel. Very strong, the strongest structure of the body, and that gives the whiteness of the teeth. And then under that you have dentin. So this is the dentin, and then you have pulp. So this is the pulp, and inside the pulp you see you have the blood vessels and nerves. Okay. Now if you see the root part, or the neck part, you don't have the enamel. That part is missing. So you have the dentin, and in the root part you have the root canal. That is for the passage of the blood vessels and nerves that enter into the pulp cavity, right? So root canal is that narrow passage. So those are the parts and the structure of a tooth. Now regulation of secretion and contraction. So when we say GI tract regulation, just remember 2 things we indicate: regulation of contraction of the wall of the GI tract and the regulation of secretion. Both happen in the GI tract. By the contraction, the food moves downwards, right? So move the food, and also break the food by contraction. So contraction helps in digestion and movement. Secretion uh, also is very important. Secretion is helping um, chemical digestion. Right, and contraction helps to move the food, and digestion or mechanical digestion or break the food. Mechanical digestion or break the food. So both should be regulated, right? Just think that if your stomach is empty, you don't need a lot of contraction, you don't need a lot of secretion, right? When the stomach is full, you need the contraction, you need more secretion, right? So that's why these things should be controlled or regulated. Now there are two reflexes to control the contraction and secretion. One is called the long reflex, another is called the short reflex. This is the wall of the GI tract. Okay, so this is the wall, and you have the food here. This is the lumen. Okay, so when you eat food, the pressure increases in the wall. So that is one thing. When the stomach is full, for example, pressure in the wall increases, right? Also, food is actually a chemical. So the chemicals are present in the stomach, and in the wall of the GI tract, for example stomach, you have the receptors. Those receptors can be activated by increased pressure or by the presence of chemicals. That's why you have two types of receptors there. Chemoreceptors are activated by the chemicals, and the mechanoreceptors are activated by pressure, mechanical. So you see, first thing, when the food enters, these receptors are activated. Okay, and then the signal from the receptors can stay in the wall of the stomach or GI tract, and the nerve can take the signal from the receptors to the smooth muscle in the wall of the stomach, smooth muscle, and the glands. So you have both in the wall. So you have the smooth muscle and you have the glands. Okay, so the nerve plexus will send signal to the smooth muscle to cause the contraction. Muscle will cause the contraction, you know that, right? And the glands will be stimulated and will cause the secretion. Okay, so contraction and secretion will occur. And you see here, the signal stays inside the wall of the GI tract. That's why this is called a short reflex. Now signal can also go to the higher brain, higher areas, to the central nervous system, to the brain, and then brain can send signal back. So this is the afferent taking the signal from the receptors to the brain, and then brain will decide and will send signal back to the nerves here in the wall, and that will stimulate the smooth muscle, and glands will cause the secretion and contraction. So this is long reflex, since it is going outside and coming back from the brain, long pathway. Now those are two reflexes control the secretion and contraction. Now there is another pathway which is very interesting. You know, even before the food enters into your body, if you see the food or smell the food, or when the food is in the mouth, not in the stomach yet, uh, even if you think about food when you are hungry, secretion and contraction occurs in the stomach, and that is called the cephalic reflex. Cephalic. Cephalic means head, So you are seeing by your brain, smelling by your brain, or when the food is in the mouth, tasting, and even you are thinking by the brain about delicious food. The signal from the brain goes to the GI tract, causes the secretion and contraction. So that is called the cephalic reflex. Cephalic means the head, cephalic part, you know that. Okay, so uh, those are the ways the secretion and contraction occurs. In the wall of the GI tract, you have 4 layers. Mucosa is the innermost, then under the mucosa, submucosa, then a thick layer of muscle, that is the smooth muscle, muscularis externa, and outermost uh, peritoneal covering, visceral peritoneum, that is the serosa. Okay, so those are 4 layers. This one is for protection, outermost connective tissue layer. This one is for the contraction, and this one contains the blood vessels, glands, and nerve plexuses. And mucosa is the innermost lining. It also has some glands, and it protects the wall, separates the food stuff from the wall. So let's see those 4 layers from inside to outside. This part is called the mucosa. In mucosa, you have 3 layers in it: epithelium, lamina propria, and muscularis mucosa. So epithelium, this is called lamina propria, white one, and this is the muscle, thin muscle layer, muscularis mucosa. So mucosa has those 3 layers. Then you have submucosa. This part, I told you that it has glands, blood vessels, nerves, lymphatic vessels. Then you have a thick layer of muscle, that is the muscularis externa, smooth muscle, causes forceful contraction. Okay, and in muscularis mucosa, the smooth muscle fibers are forming 2 layers. One layer is called the circular, because the muscle fibers are forming the circle, and this one is longitudinal. The fibers are going this way. In circular layer, the fibers are going like this. In longitudinal, the fibers are going like this. Okay, so circular will cause the contraction that will make the lumen smaller, and longitudinal will make the tube shorter. And this is the outermost layer, serosa. Okay, serosa. So those are the layers in the wall of the GI tract. Remember those 4 layers. Uh, so just go over this. Uh, in 2 layers, nerve plexuses or nerve networks of nerves are present. One in plexus is in submucosa, that is called the submucosal nerve plexus, and another is in the muscularis externa, in that thick smooth muscle layer, and that is called the myenteric. Myo means muscle, so myenteric nerve plexus. One in submucosa, one is in the muscle. And in the wall, you have the sympathetic and parasympathetic those belong to the autonomic nervous system, you know that, uh, and these regulate the secretion and motility. Sympathetic stimulate, sympathetic activation inhibits the secretion and motility. So inhibitory, this is kind of opposite than the other areas. In your heart, you know that sympathetic activation increases the heart rate and blood pressure. In this case, inhibits the secretion and motility, right? And parasympathetic does the opposite, stimulation. So in your GI tract, it is opposite. Movement of the GI tract, three types of movements occur in the GI tract. One is called peristalsis. Wave-like movement goes one after another. So that is one. And another is called segmentation. So peristalsis, the best way to explain is if you take a tube, like a rubber tube, okay, and put a ring inside it, and then push from this side, push the ring from outside by pressing the wall of the tube. If the wall is slippery, very slippery, like your GI tract, the ring will move like this, right? So you push again and again to move it a little bit in each step. So that goes like one after another, wave-like movement. So that is peristalsis. Segmentation is, this is your GI tract, okay, and you have the food inside it, and at the same time contraction occurs in multiple at multiple locations like this. So you squeeze here, here, here at the same time, okay. So that is the segmentation. Make sense? So those are two main types of movements, and there is another type of movement that is called pendular movement. Some books mention that, most of the books not. You know that GI tract, you must remember, is hung inside the peritoneal cavity or abdominal cavity by mesentery. This is the wall of your body, and this is the mesentery, and this is the GI tract, right? So this mesentery that is holding the GI tract inside the peritoneal cavity, hanging it. So small amount of pendular movement occurs, like pendulum. So those are three types of movements, and movements help to digest or break, as well as to move the food stuff downwards, which is very important. Esophagus is a muscular tube from the pharynx, the last part of the pharynx, to the stomach, okay, and it pierces through the diaphragm to enter into the stomach that I showed you before. If you see the wall of the esophagus, you have four layers: mucosa, submucosa, muscularis externa, and only layer which is, the name is different, structurally it is same. The serosa in other parts of GI tract, like in stomach, small intestine, large intestine, this outermost layer is called the serosa. But in this case, in case of esophagus, it is called adventitia. That is the only difference, okay. Otherwise, same four layers in the wall. Deglutition is swallowing of the food. Swallowing of the food, and many muscles, 22 muscle groups help to move the tongue, as well as help to swallow the food. And tongue, soft palate, pharynx, they are involved in swallowing. Now swallowing has or deglutition has two phases. One is the buccal you push the food bolus from the buccal cavity or oral cavity into the pharynx. And this part is voluntary, right? If you want to keep the food in your mouth for longer time, you can do it. If you want to swallow, you can do it. So this part is completely voluntary, this phase. And then next phase is pharyngeal esophageal or pharyngo-esophageal phase. This phase is involuntary. Once you push the food into the pharynx, then you don't think, right? You know that it will go by itself to the all the way to the stomach. So this part is involuntary. Okay. So you see, you push the tongue against the hard palate. This is the food bolus. So you push here, so the food bolus will move towards the pharynx. Okay, that is the initiation of the swallowing or beginning of the swallowing. So you get the help of the tongue. So the soft palate and uvula will move up to block this passage I mentioned before. And this is the upper end of the esophagus, which is called the upper esophageal sphincter here, that remains closed, but when the food arrives here, it will get opened. Make sense? To let it get in. When the food bolus will already get in, then it will get closed here. So just to prevent the backflow. So food will go by peristalsis to the stomach. And when the food bolus will arrive, when the food bolus is passing through the esophagus, you see there is another sphincter at the lower end of the esophagus that is called the gastroesophageal sphincter or gastroesophageal sphincter. This is closed, but when the food bolus will arrive here, that will get open to let the food get in, and then will get closed again. Okay, so here you see it got open to let the food get in. Stomach. Stomach is a very dilated hollow organ of GI tract. First we'll see the parts of the stomach. Stomach has a fundus, which is the dome shaped part here, and then you have the body. The wide middle portion is the body. So this entire part is the body of the stomach. Then you have the pyloric part here. So this is the body here, and this is the pyloric part. So fundus, body, pyloric part. Now the area where the esophagus enters into the stomach, that is called cardia. So cardia is the area where the esophagus enters. Now the pyloric part has three things here. The wide first part of the pyloric part is called the pyloric antrum, and then it gets narrow, and this narrower part or last part is called the pyloric canal. So pyloric antrum, pyloric canal, and then you have the sphincter, that is called the pyloric sphincter. Okay, so pyloric sphincter will regulate how much food stuff will exit or will get out to enter into the duodenum, small intestine. Okay, so those are the parts. Now if you see the wall in the muscular layer or musculus externa, you have two layers I mentioned, outer longitudinal, inner circular. But in case of stomach, you have three. One additional layer, which is the innermost one, that is called the oblique layer. So you see, in other parts of your GI tract, everywhere you have two layers, inner circular, outer longitudinal. But in case of stomach, you have an additional layer of smooth muscle, that is the oblique, the fibers. So the inner oblique, middle circular, outer longitudinal. Now another thing you need to know that if you see the inner surface of the stomach, you'll see many foldings or folds. These are called rugae, gastric rugae. And the gastric rugae are these folds, and when the stomach is empty, you can clearly see those rugae become very prominent. When the stomach is full, they disappear. So the rugae help to expand the stomach. When you eat a lot, the stomach expands a lot, so the rugae help in that expansion and contraction. And rugae also increase the surface area. Lesser omentum and greater omentum, those are two connective tissue membrane like structures. This is the stomach. So this smaller curve of the stomach is called lesser curvature, and this one is called the greater curvature. Okay. Now from the liver, this is the liver connective tissue membrane that goes to the lesser curvature of the stomach, and this is called the lesser omentum. Okay. And then from the greater curvature of the stomach, what happens? A large curtain like membrane that traps down like this. From this side, they have dissected it here, you see. So this one goes down like this to cover the whole front of the abdominal cavity. It traps down from here, and that is called the greater omentum. So they have dissected the greater omentum. Actually, it covers the whole abdominal cavity from the front. And the omentum stores a lot of fat. You see yellowish color, lot of fat is stored in the omentum, and under the abdominal wall you have this greater omentum that forms a thick pad of fats, form a thick pad of fat on the surface of the greater omentum, which gives insulation and protects the internal organs. So those are the things you need to know in this part of the digestive system. I hope this helps. Thank you.